My sister changed my newborn's name while I was in labor, then reported us to CPS for abuse so she could keep him for herself. When I begged her to stop, she screamed, "Leonardo was mine from the start. You killed my baby, so I took yours." I said nothing. That was 5 months ago. Last night, she stood barefoot in the rain outside our house, clutching a photo of DiCaprio and whispering, "He was supposed to be mine." Can you imagine a nightmare so surreal, so utterly unhinged, that your own sister tries to steal your newborn baby? All because you used a name she wanted? Because that's not a hypothetical question for me. That was my life. It all started innocently enough. I was pregnant, overjoyed, and excited to name my son Leonardo, a tribute to my childhood best friend who'd passed away a few years prior. At my baby shower, everyone thought it was beautiful, sweet, and honoring gesture. Everyone, that is, except my sister, Casey. I still remember the sound of her palms slamming the table. The room went silent. "That's my baby name," she shrieked, her voice shaking with outrage. "You know how much I love Leonardo DiCaprio. I've always planned to name my baby that." We tried to explain, gently, that she wasn't even in a relationship, let alone pregnant. But Casey wasn't hearing it. She called us traitors, packed her things, and stormed out with a chilling promise. "See you all in court." 2 days later, a letter arrived. A legal-looking document giving me 24 hours to relinquish the name or face consequences. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a tantrum anymore. This was an attack. My family called an emergency intervention. We sat down with Casey at Mom's house, trying to reason with her, to explain that I wasn't giving up the name. Casey's face was tomato red with fury. She kept cutting me off, insisting my dead friend would understand that this name had been her dream since she was a little girl. It was wild. My husband, Samuel, and I held our ground. We even had a lawyer friend confirm she couldn't actually sue us over a baby name. Cornered, Casey gave us an ultimatum. "The name is mine, or I go no contact with all of you." Without a word, every single one of us pointed at the door. Her eyes widened. She stared. Then in this angry, defeated whisper, she snarled, "Fine, you can have the stupid name." We thought that was it. For 3 months, we heard nothing. A blessed, terrifying silence. Then my Labor Day came. I was literally in the pushing stage when Casey burst into the delivery room, holding a teddy bear and screaming, "Michael is here!" The entire room, my family, the nurses, even me mid-contraction, stared at her, utterly bewildered. Samuel, bewildered, asked what she meant. Casey beamed, rubbing her flat stomach. "I'm pregnant too. You said I couldn't have the name because I wasn't pregnant, so I went out and became pregnant. Problem solved." We just gawked. She looked like she had 5 heads. Security had to remove her, her screams of fairness echoing down the hall. An hour later, I was finally holding my beautiful son, our Leonardo. A nurse came in, looking deeply uncomfortable. "There's been an issue with your paperwork," she stammered. "It says here the baby's name is Michael." Samuel shot up like a hawk. He investigated, and what he found made my stomach drop. Casey had actually tried to officially change our baby's name on the hospital documents while I was in active labor. The hospital fixed it, but the message was clear. Casey was absolutely unhinged. The next morning, still recovering, my brother called, his voice tight with shock. "Casey's at the hospital. She's hurt really badly." Turns out my sister had woken up at 5 a.m., filing name claims, then drove to every courthouse in the entire state, desperate to legally claim the name Leonardo. She barely slept, didn't eat or drink, and collapsed from sunstroke on the courthouse steps. She fell straight onto her belly and started miscarrying. The moment she was lucid again, she called me. From her hospital bed, "You killed my baby," she shrieked, "because you forced me to fight for what was rightfully mine. Leonardo was mine. How does it feel to know an innocent baby is dead because of you?" I hung up without a word. My hands were shaking. 3 weeks later, I was breastfeeding Leonardo when Samuel's phone rang. It was Child Protective Services. Someone had reported us for child abuse and neglect. The caseworker rattled off allegations that made my blood run cold. Samuel was violent. They cited a juvenile bar fight from when he was 17. My dad, who lived with us, was a threat. They brought up an old teaching scandal where a student had accused him of inappropriate behavior before admitting she lied. They even claimed our house was unsafe. While we were still reeling, my neighbor texted me screenshots from our local Facebook group. Casey had written a long, dramatic post about making the brave decision to report abuse she'd witnessed in our home, painting herself as a hero saving a baby from danger. Unbelievable. 20 minutes later, I let the CPS workers in, thinking our clean, loving home would immediately end this nightmare. The caseworker checked the nursery, the baby supplies, saw Leonardo sleeping peacefully. But then she saw my dad in the kitchen. "Is this the grandfather mentioned in the report?" she asked, pulling out her paperwork. "The one with the teaching scandal." I frantically explained the student had lied, but the caseworker's face had already hardened. "With your husband's juvenile assault record and this," she said coldly, "we have to follow protocol." "I'm sorry." I couldn't breathe. I watched helpless as she took my baby and carried him out. "He'll be with family," she said. "Your sister seems very prepared. She already had a nursery ready." Of course she did. She'd probably set it up the day after the baby shower. Our lawyer told us emergency custody hearings could take time. The investigation would clear us, but bureaucracy moved slowly. In the meantime, Casey had our son. She was posting photos on Instagram, calling him my sweet Leonardo, while I sat at home, pumping milk for a baby I couldn't hold. My body didn't understand that my son was gone. Every 3 hours, like clockwork, I'd feel the letdown reflex and have to pump or risk mastitis. Each session was torture, a physical reminder of what I'd lost. I kept rereading the caseworker's email. "The investigation is complete. No evidence of abuse found. But the emergency custody order will remain until the formal hearing." That could take weeks, maybe months. Months. My sister had my baby. The doorbell rang. I dragged myself from the couch, still in yesterday's milk-stained shirt. My neighbor, Mrs. Doherty, stood there holding a casserole dish. "I saw what happened," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "That woman who took your baby. She was here last week asking questions about you." My hands trembled as I took the dish. "What kind of questions?" "About your routines. When your husband gets home. If your dad helps with the baby." She even asked if I'd ever heard arguing. Mrs. Doherty shifted uncomfortably. "I told her you were wonderful parents. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was gathering ammunition." Our lawyer explained that family placements were prioritized in emergency custody. Since Casey had a nursery and passed inspection, she was deemed suitable. The fact that she orchestrated the whole thing didn't matter without proof. Samuel came home early, his face drawn. His boss had called him in after seeing Casey's Facebook posts. The damage was done. People were whispering. His juvenile record suddenly made him look dangerous. Mom called that evening, her voice strained. "I went to see Casey," she said. "She has the baby dressed in all new clothes. She's calling him Leonardo, and she won't let me hold him unless I call him that too." "Did she say anything about giving him back?" She said. "You should have just let her have the name." She kept saying this was meant to be, that losing her baby was a sign that Leonardo was destined to be hers. Mom's voice cracked. "I don't recognize my own daughter anymore." The next morning I decided to fight, not with anger, but with relentless documentation. I created a timeline from the baby shower, every interaction, every threat, every manipulative move. Samuel helped gather screenshots of her social media, especially the posts before Leonardo was born, where she talked about her future baby, Leonardo. My dad, quiet since the CPS visit, finally spoke up at dinner. "I keep thinking about that teaching scandal," he said, pushing food around his plate. "Even though Sarah admitted she lied, it's still on my record. Just like Samuel's bar fight. These things follow you." He looked up. "Maybe I should move out temporarily. It might help your case." "Absolutely not," Samuel said firmly. "We're not letting her tear this family apart. We did nothing wrong." But doubt crept in during the dark hours. What if the caseworker was right to be concerned? What if our past mistakes, even cleared ones, made us unfit? I found myself second-guessing every parenting decision I'd made in Leonardo's 3 short weeks of life. On day 4 of separation, I drove past Casey's apartment. I didn't plan to stop, just needed to be close. But her car wasn't there. My heart raced. I called Mom. "Oh, she mentioned taking Leonardo to a baby yoga class this morning," Mom said. "She's really throwing herself into this aunt role." Aunt role. She was calling herself his aunt? What else would she call herself? The rage that filled me was volcanic. I drove to the baby yoga studio and watched through the window. There she was, Casey, holding my baby, surrounded by other mothers who had no idea they were witnessing a kidnapping in slow motion. Leonardo was fussing, probably hungry. Did she even have formula? Was she giving him the pumped milk I had sent through Mom? I wanted to burst in, to scream the truth, but I knew it would only hurt our case. Instead, I took photos. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. Our lawyer called later that day. "Mixed news. Good news. We've got a hearing date. 3 weeks from now." "Bad news," Casey's filed for temporary guardianship, citing the ongoing investigation and your family's instability. She can't do that. She can try. He then said something chilling. Casey's timing here seems too perfect. The nursery already set up, knowing exactly which courthouse procedures to follow, having all the right documentation ready. She's claiming you're mentally unstable due to postpartum depression, that you hung up on her when she was miscarrying, showing lack of empathy. She's building a case that she's the more suitable caregiver. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the nursery door, which had stayed closed since they took Leonardo. I hadn't been able to go in there. His smell still lingered. That sweet baby scent that made my arms ache with emptiness. Samuel found me on the nursery floor an hour later, surrounded by Leonardo's unworn clothes. We're going to get him back, he said, pulling me against him. She can't keep this up forever. The truth will come out. But would it? Casey had always been the master manipulator, the one who could cry on cue and twist any situation to her advantage. My milk supply was decreasing from the stress. Every day I pumped. It was the only thing I could still do for my son. Mom picked up the milk, taking it to Casey, who accepted it with fake gratitude and real smugness. She's redecorating his nursery, Mom reported after one visit. Says the one you had wasn't stimulating enough for proper development. She's bought all these educational toys and hired a sleep consultant. The irony burned. Casey, who'd gotten pregnant out of spite and miscarried from her own recklessness, was now playing super aunt with my baby. She was living out her Leonardo DiCaprio fantasy with my Leonardo. I started visiting the CPS office daily, bringing new evidence. The caseworker, Miss Patterson, was professional but overwhelmed. The investigation cleared you, she reminded me, but the family court judge makes the final custody decision. Without proof of malicious intent, it's considered a good faith report. The fact that a family member is willing to provide care during the investigation is actually considered positive. I wanted to scream. 2 weeks into our separation, Samuel's work situation deteriorated. A client Googled him and found Casey's Facebook posts. His boss suggested he take unpaid time off. Dad wasn't faring better. He'd returned to substitute teaching. But word had gotten out about the CPS investigation. The school district quietly removed him from their list. Casey, meanwhile, was thriving. Her Instagram showed daily updates of her Leonardo hitting milestones. First smile that I missed. First time holding his head up that I missed. She'd even started a mommy blog about unexpected parenthood and when family steps up. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Every like, every supportive comment on her posts felt like a knife in my chest. I printed everything. Every post, every comment, every photo where she called him my Leonardo. The stack of evidence grew daily, but would it be enough? The family court system moved at a glacial pace while my baby grew and changed without me. 3 days before the hearing, disaster struck. I'd gone to the grocery store. When I returned, Samuel was on the porch with 2 police officers. My heart stopped. There's been another report, he said, his voice hollow. Someone called in a wellness check. Said they were concerned about my mental state, that I'd been making threats. The officers were professional, but thorough. They asked about weapons, my mental health history, if I'd threatened Casey. Of course I hadn't. But someone had called, claiming to be a concerned neighbor who'd overheard violent threats. We knew it was Casey, but proving it was another matter. The wellness check would go on record. Another mark against us. Another piece of her carefully constructed narrative. That night, I finally broke down completely. The ugly cry that had been building for weeks poured out. Samuel held me as I sobbed about missing Leonardo's first weeks, about my arms that ached to hold him, about the injustice. She's winning, I gasped between sobs. She's taking everything. No, Samuel said firmly. She's desperate. The wellness check, the social media campaign, it's all because she knows the hearing is coming. She knows the truth will come out. But I wasn't sure anymore. Truth seemed like such a fragile thing compared to Casey's elaborate web of lies. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood in Leonardo's nursery, finally able to enter it. His smell still lingered. I'll fight, I promised him. Not with lies or manipulation like Casey, but with truth and love and the fierce determination of a mother who's been separated from her baby for far too long. Tomorrow would begin the battle to bring him home. I just prayed it would be enough. The morning of the hearing arrived with a stomach-turning mix of hope and dread. We arrived an hour early. Casey was already there, sitting with Leonardo in a designer stroller. She dressed him in an outfit I'd never seen, complete with tiny shoes he didn't need. My body reacted instantly to seeing my son. Milk letting down despite my efforts to wean. I pressed my arms against my chest, trying to hide the growing, wet spots on my blouse. In the conference room, Casey immediately launched into her performance, dabbing at dry eyes, describing her concerns about our home. She presented photos of Leonardo thriving in her care, glowing reports from the infant development specialist she'd hired. When it was our turn, I spread out her evidence. The timeline showing Casey's obsession with the name. Screenshots of her pregnancy announcement days after visiting fertility clinics. Most damning, a text she'd sent to a friend, bragging about her plan to get custody through CPS reports. The supervisor examined everything, asking pointed questions about the timing of Casey's nursery preparation, her sudden expertise. For the first time, I saw doubt in Miss Patterson's expression. Then Casey played her trump card, a letter from a child psychologist stating Leonardo showed signs of attachment to her, and disrupting this bond could cause psychological harm. The hearing officer looked concerned. The meeting ended without resolution. They needed 2 more weeks to review everything. I left feeling hollowed out, watching Casey will my son away, cooing at him like he'd always been hers. That afternoon, Mrs. Doherty, our elderly neighbor, knocked on our door. In her shaking hands, a manila envelope. Inside, photos of Casey repeatedly visiting our house in the weeks before Leonardo's birth, always when we weren't home. In several shots, Casey was clearly photographing our property, peering through windows. Mrs. Doherty had kept a detailed log after finding Casey's behavior suspicious. Dates, times, descriptions of Casey asking other neighbors about our schedules, our habits, even which pediatrician we'd chosen. She'd been building her case for months. We immediately sent it to our lawyer. 2 days later, Casey escalated dramatically. I was at the grocery store when my phone exploded with notifications. Casey had gone live on social media in what looked like a hospital waiting room. She claimed I had been stalking her, threatening her. She held up a restraining order application, tearfully explaining her fear for Leonardo's safety. The video went viral. People who didn't know the full story saw a devoted caregiver protecting an innocent baby from an unstable birth mother. Comments poured in, calling me dangerous, suggesting I needed psychiatric help. Samuel found me in the parking lot, hyperventilating in my car. Casey's playing chess, he said, while everyone else thought they were having a family dinner. Mom became our unexpected ally. She'd been playing neutral to maintain access. But Casey's latest stunt pushed her over the edge. She started secretly recording Casey's unguarded moments during her visits. What she discovered was disturbing. Casey had essentially erased us from Leonardo's existence. She'd created a nursery filled with Leonardo DiCaprio memorabilia. She referred to herself as Mama and had taught the daycare workers she was his mother. Mom also noticed practical problems. Casey was overwhelmed by the actual work of caring for an infant. She had night nannies, day nannies, specialists for everything. When left alone, she'd become frantic, calling Mom for help with basic tasks. During one visit, Mom found Leonardo with a severe diaper rash that had clearly been developing for days. Casey hadn't noticed. Mom documented everything with photos, took him to urgent care, and the doctor noted the neglect in his medical records. Then came an unexpected break. Casey's night nanny, Victoria, reached out through Mom. She was increasingly uncomfortable, realizing Leonardo wasn't actually Casey's baby. She'd kept detailed notes about Casey's behavior, including middle-of-the-night rants about how she deserved Leonardo more than I did. Victoria revealed something crucial. Casey had been planning this since before she got pregnant. She'd researched custody laws, consulted lawyers under false pretenses, even attended foster parent training to understand the system. The pregnancy had been intentional, meant to strengthen her claim, and when she lost that baby, she pivoted to taking mine. We met Victoria at a coffee shop. She handed over copies of her notes, terrified of losing her nanny license. She described incidents where Casey would practice her concerned aunt performance in the mirror. The supervisor agreed to an emergency review. But when the meeting day arrived, Victoria was nowhere to be found. She'd left town suddenly, texting Mom that she couldn't risk her career. Without her direct testimony, her notes were just hearsay. Casey knew we'd found her weakness. She hired a new nanny and began posting about the previous one's instability and false allegations. The smear campaign intensified. Casey created a blog called Protecting Leonardo, documenting her version of events. Posts about recognizing abuse, dealing with unstable family members, and the challenges of emergency caregiving. Each entry twisted reality, building a narrative where she was the hero saving a baby from neglectful parents. Local parenting groups started sharing her posts. Some invited her to speak about child safety. She accepted eagerly, showing up with Leonardo like a prop, spreading lies about our family. People who'd known us for years began avoiding us, unsure what to believe. I started having panic attacks. Mom made a risky move. She convinced Casey to let her babysit while Casey attended a very important meeting. Once alone with Leonardo, Mom drove him to our house. For 3 precious hours, I held my son. He'd changed so much, but when I held him, he settled against me like he remembered. I fed him, changed his diaper, sang the lullabies I'd planned. Samuel took hundreds of photos and videos, evidence that we could parent our son. When Mom had to take him back, I thought my heart would shatter. But those 3 hours had given me something I'd lost: certainty. Leonardo knew me. He was still my baby. The morning before the hearing, our lawyer called. Casey had submitted a thick folder of new evidence. Statements from people we'd never heard of, claiming to have witnessed concerning behavior. She'd hired a private investigator who photographed us at our worst moments. Me crying in the car, Samuel looking angry after reading her posts, Dad walking alone, looking depressed. Every human moment of struggle had been documented and weaponized. The report painted a picture of an unstable family unit. Never mind that our instability was caused by having our child stolen. I spent that last night in Leonardo's nursery, surrounded by clothes he'd never wear, toys he'd never play with. The room smelled musty now, abandoned. I picked up the stuffed elephant my best friend's mother had sent. I remembered how I'd planned to tell Leonardo about the friend he was named for. Samuel found me there at dawn. We didn't speak our fears. We'd done everything possible to prepare, but Casey had shown she'd stop at nothing. As we dressed for the hearing, I thought about the last 5 months of hell, how a sister's jealousy had spiraled into losing my child, our livelihoods, our reputations, how the system meant to protect children had been twisted into a weapon against us, how truth seemed powerless against a well-crafted lie. But I also thought about those 3 stolen hours with Leonardo, the way he'd gripped my finger, the little sighs he made while sleeping. He was worth fighting for, worth enduring any humiliation or hardship. I was his mother, and I would never stop fighting to bring him home. We arrived at the family services building to find Casey already there, surrounded by supporters from her online community. She turned our custody hearing into a spectacle, complete with matching t-shirts reading, "Team Leonardo's Safety." My stomach churned, but I kept my head high. Inside the conference room, Casey entered with Leonardo, making a show of checking on him. She dressed him in an outfit covered in tiny Oscars. I forced myself not to react. The supervisor, her expression grave, explained this hearing would determine custody, and that the best interests of Leonardo were the only consideration. I bit my tongue until it bled. What followed was a systematic presentation of evidence. Casey's team painted us as unfit, emphasizing Samuel's juvenile record, Dad's scandal, my mental instability. They magnified every human frailty into dysfunction. Then came our turn. Our lawyer methodically dismantled Casey's narrative, the timeline of her obsession, the calculated nature of her reports, Mrs. Doherty's photos showing Casey's surveillance, Mom's documentation revealing the reality of Casey's chaotic caregiving, the digital forensics exposing the edited videos. As the evidence mounted, Casey's mask began to crack. Her supporters couldn't hear, but she could. When our lawyer showed texts where she bragged about her plan, her face flushed. When Mom's recordings of her calling herself Mama played, she shifted uncomfortably. The supervisor asked pointed questions, no longer accepting surface explanations. Why a nursery before reporting abuse? Why consult adoption lawyers while claiming temporary care? Why had multiple nannies quit citing ethical concerns? Each question chipped away at the hero narrative. Then came the moment that changed everything. The supervisor produced a document we hadn't seen. CPS had conducted their own investigation. They'd found posts from 5 years ago where Casey talked about naming her future son Leonardo, complete with nursery plans identical to what she'd created. More damning, they discovered Casey had been in contact with multiple fertility clinics in the weeks between the baby shower and her pregnancy announcement. She'd undergone emergency IUI treatments, maxing out credit cards in her desperation. The timeline proved she'd gotten pregnant specifically to claim the name. The supervisor's voice was stern. The investigation has revealed a pattern of manipulation and deception incompatible with the best interest of the child. While the initial removal followed protocol based on the reports filed, it is clear those reports had been fabricated as part of a larger scheme to obtain custody. Casey's composure finally shattered. She burst into raw, ugly sobs. She ranted about how unfair it was, how she'd loved Leonardo DiCaprio her whole life, how she'd dreamed of this name since childhood. She accused me of stealing her dream, of forcing her to take extreme measures. The more she talked, the more unhinged she sounded. She revealed details we hadn't known, hiring someone to plan evidence, coaching witnesses. She even confessed to deliberately getting pregnant. Her supporters, able to hear her through the thin walls, began filtering out. By the time Casey finished her meltdown, the waiting room was empty except for our family. When we reconvened, the decision was swift. Emergency custody was revoked immediately. Leonardo would be returned to us that day. Casey would have supervised visitation only, pending a full psychological evaluation. The fraudulent reports would be referred for criminal investigation. The supervisor acknowledged the system's failure, promising a full review of procedures. She also recommended we pursue civil action against Casey for damages. Casey had to be escorted out by security, screaming about conspiracies. An hour later, I sat in a small room as a caseworker brought Leonardo to me. 5 months after he'd been taken, my son was coming home. He was bigger, more alert. But when I picked him up, he settled against me like no time had passed. Samuel wrapped his arms around both of us. We stood there, crying and laughing simultaneously. The ride home felt surreal. Leonardo in his car seat, finally where he belonged. Dad waiting on the porch with tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Doherty and other neighbors who'd supported us, gathering to welcome him home. The nursery that had sat empty for months, finally filled with baby sounds. That night, as I rocked Leonardo to sleep, I thought about the journey. The false allegations, the social media campaigns, the financial ruin, the emotional torture of separation. All because my sister couldn't accept that I'd chosen a name she wanted. But we'd survived. Truth had eventually prevailed, though at tremendous cost. Samuel was still unemployed. Dad's reputation remained damaged. We'd spent our savings. The trauma would take years to process. Yet, none of that mattered compared to having our son home. The first week was a whirlwind. Leonardo's sleep schedule was completely disrupted from Casey's chaotic caregiving. I spent nights walking the halls, relearning his cries, his preferences. Samuel tackled the paperwork to expunge Casey's false reports, contacting his former employer, beginning the slow process of rebuilding his reputation. Dad emerged from his isolation, helping with Leonardo during the day. I watched him hold his grandson, whispering apologies for things that weren't his fault. Packages started arriving. Baby clothes, toys, formula samples, all addressed to Casey at our house. She'd signed us up for every baby registry. Mom revealed more disturbing details. Casey's designer outfits were bought on credit. Specialists were scheduled, but never attended. Casey had even told Leonardo's pediatrician she was adopting him, claiming we'd abandoned him due to addiction. Forged consent forms, false medical histories, listing herself as primary guardian on insurance forms. Untangling that web of lies took hours. Samuel's cousin forwarded us screenshots from parenting groups where Casey was still active. She'd pivoted her narrative, claiming we'd manipulated the system to steal Leonardo from her. Some believed her. Our savings were gone. Credit cards maxed. Samuel couldn't find new work. Employers Googled him and found the scandal. I returned to work early, leaving Leonardo with Dad. Coworkers whispered. 2 weeks after the hearing, Casey attempted her first supervised visit. She arrived wearing a t-shirt with Leonardo DiCaprio's face on it, carrying movie memorabilia. When I placed Leonardo in her arms, she immediately started calling him Leo, insisting it was a better nickname. She criticized our nursery, implied Leonardo was thinner, that we weren't stimulating him. When he fussed, she claimed he was upset because we'd turned him against her. The social worker took notes, clearly concerned. After she left, I found hidden notes throughout our house. Tucked behind picture frames, inside books, he's mine. You stole him. This isn't over. Samuel installed security cameras. We changed the locks. Mrs. Doherty organized an informal neighborhood watch. During her 4th visit, Casey smuggled in a hidden camera disguised as a teddy bear. Dad found it. Police took a report. Samuel finally got a job interview, 2 hours away. Less pay, brutal commute, but we couldn't be choosy. Mom discovered Casey had been visiting Leonardo's old daycare, filling out enrollment paperwork with forged documents, even paying a deposit. Another mess. The court-ordered psychological evaluation revealed what we'd always known. Casey showed signs of delusional thinking, narcissistic personality traits, and an inability to distinguish fantasy from reality. Her obsession had morphed into a fixed belief. Intensive therapy and suspended visitation were recommended. Casey's response was predictable: new social media accounts, claiming the evaluation was biased, a petition to reunite Leo with his real mother. Each platform had to be contacted, each post documented. 3 months after Leonardo came home, We attended a community barbecue. Some neighbors avoided us. Others offered quiet support. Children who'd played at our house weren't allowed over anymore. We smiled through the awkwardness. That night, Casey appeared on our doorstep, violating the no-contact order. Disheveled, thinner, sobbing about losing everything. She begged to see Leonardo one last time. Samuel called the police. Casey rocked back and forth, clutching a photo of Leonardo DiCaprio, mumbling about destiny. She didn't resist. The next morning, Casey's former landlord called. Among her belongings, a storage unit key. Inside, years of obsessive planning. Journals detailing her Leonardo DiCaprio fantasies. Vision boards of imagined children. Printed articles about custody laws and manipulation tactics. Evidence of a decade-long delusion we'd never fully grasped. We turned everything over to authorities. 6 months passed. Samuel adjusted to his commute. Dad started volunteering at the library. I returned to full-time work. Casey's supervised visits never resumed. She refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Mom heard she'd moved to another state, telling people there about the son who'd been stolen from her. The cycle continuing elsewhere, though authorities had been notified. Leonardo grew and thrived. He learned to crawl in the nursery Casey called inadequate. Took his first steps in the home she tried to have him removed from. His first word was "Dada," directed at Samuel. Simple moments, made precious by how close we'd come to losing them. 1 year after the custody battle ended, I finally entered Leonardo's nursery without feeling the ghost of those empty months. The room was cluttered with toys, books, evidence of a child well-loved and present. I picked up the stuffed elephant from my late friend's mother, telling Leonardo the story I'd always planned to share about his namesake. Samuel found me there later, Leonardo asleep. In my arms. We sat together. No words needed. Our son was home. Our family intact despite everything. The scars would always be there. Trust harder to give. Innocence lost. But we'd survived Casey's obsession. Protected our child. Found strength we didn't know we possessed. As I tucked Leonardo into his crib that night, I thought about the name that had started everything. Such a simple choice, honoring a lost friend, had unleashed such chaos. But watching my son sleep peacefully, safe in his own room, I knew I wouldn't change anything. He was Leonardo, named for love and memory, not for an actor or anyone else's dreams. The future stretched ahead with normal challenges. Teething, potty training, school decisions. Mundane parental concerns that felt like gifts after what we'd endured. Casey remained a shadow at the edges, a cautionary tale. But she no longer had power over our lives. We'd learned to document everything, trust carefully, and cherish the ordinary moments others took for granted. Our son would grow up knowing he was fought for, protected, loved beyond measure. That was the only truth that mattered. So, I have to ask, have you ever encountered someone so consumed by a fantasy that they tried to destroy everything around them? What would you have done in our shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories and insights really help, and I want to hear them.